Hi, my name is Lily Ledford, and I started my food education SAE about a year ago when my culinary teacher had nominated me for a CTE scholarship. I was required to develop some sort of project that demonstrated leadership skills, and because I had an interest in education, I decided to develop lessons to teach in a classroom setting. I spent about 2 months between March and May testing my pupusa recipe, which is what I decided to make with the kids, and writing a lecture on food insecurity. I was able to go in and teach for one class period at Alder Grove, and I did end up receiving the scholarship. Because I found so much passion and enjoyment through that project, I decided to keep it going this year but expand it. This led to 13 individual demonstrations and over 55 hours worth of meetings, planning time, etc., just in class. Obviously, my project has gotten a lot bigger than I ever intended it to, but my two overall goals have stayed the same throughout. My first and most important goal was to create resources for food education that were morally neutral. I feel like socially we are surrounded by a diet culture that seeks to shame people for finding enjoyment in food, and I have always felt so uncomfortable with that. I feel like people don't often think about the consequences surrounding the way that they talk about their own body image, and food and nutrition around children, because at the end of the day, children don't have the capacity to think about things very complexly, so they will interpret it as being very black and white, no matter how you say it. This commonly gets interpreted in two ways, and unfortunately the most common of those is internalized shame surrounding food. A lot of children grow up hearing things like carbs are bad and sugar makes you fat and stuff like that, but they don't actually understand what those micro and macronutrients are and what they do for their bodies. So when they hear those things, they decide to reject those urges or those inclinations towards those foods. It's incredibly damaging, but unfortunately it's a message that starts being shared very, very young, and it's very hard to undo. The other way that this is often interpreted is as a total rejection of any nutritional information. In a lot of instances, if you grow up feeling a lot of shame surrounding food, but you don't understand why, it's difficult to grasp onto that shame, and so you just reject the idea of healthy eating and nutritious food altogether. My secondary goal for this project was to provide resources and education for students who may be experiencing food insecurity and not entirely understand it. And my way of doing that was explaining different examples of what food insecurity may look like, especially things like parents not being home enough to cook nutritious meals. And then provide the kids with recipes that are very simple and quick to make, but also are made from very cheap ingredients. I wanted them to be able to go home and feel some level of confidence in the kitchen, so that if there is nobody who's, there waiting for them to get home from school to make them a nice snack, that they can make sure that they get fed. I tried to include some sort of lab in every demonstration, and for the most part, that was actual hands-on cooking. We made pupusas, pizzas, sandwiches, smoothies, onigiri, popsicles, ramen, and a few other simple goodies. We also had some foundational educational labs where we did things like practice balancing tastes, which is a very important foundational culinary skill, and also where we learned about things like nutrition and preservatives. I often hear these words weaponized without being explained, and so I really wanted to make sure that everybody had some base level understanding of what macronutrients were. Our most successful lab, not just in terms of the lesson, but also in terms of student engagement, was what I have been referring to as the strawberry rehydration lab. We made 2 piles of strawberries, one pile being fresh and one pile being freeze-dried, and in between those 2 piles we had a dish of water on each kid's station. We had them test the strawberries on their own and give observations about how they tasted and what they think might have happened to the dried ones. And then we had them rehydrate the freeze-dried strawberries and compare and contrast the tastes and textures. Once they were done discussing, I explained the process of freeze drying and how it leaves most of the macronutrients intact, but it takes out all the water to prevent molding or rotting. I say this was the most successful one because the kids were fascinated at this idea, and instantly they wanted to know more about other preservatives, other methods of preserving food, and what other foods get preserved in these ways. I had learned at this point the importance of visual aids and meeting them where they are. No matter how much you want to just talk and have them listen, they are not always capable of holding that level of attention. So I learned that I really do need to meet them where they are at and bring things that they can hold, they can look at, they can interact with, even if we are just talking. So I pulled out a bunch of different preserved foods that I had brought from home, including dried mangoes and beans, canned soups, pickled beets, some jellied berries, and a packet of ramen that used chemical preservatives. We went down the line and passed around each food item while explaining the process by which it had been preserved and the impact that would have on the nutrition of the food. We then passed around a hotel pan that had about 12 egg yolks in it, and we had each kid pour in a bit of soy sauce so that we could make cured egg yolks. The kids adored this lab. They loved that they got to play in the water. They loved that they got to put it all in their mouths. They loved that it was very student driven. So it wasn't just me talking. I was asking them questions. I was prompting them to discuss with each other, and then we would all regroup and talk about it as a class. We replicated that lab at both Trillium and Fuente because it had been so successful. It had also been a really great way for us to be able to explain food insecurity and food deserts, which is something that we had tried touching on in a few different ways, but had generally been unsuccessful in terms of holding attention. When we combined it with something that was very, very tactile and engaging, the students were instantly absorbed by it. I made sure to include pictures of what notes I had saved, just to show how much actually goes into planning a 1-hour lesson or a 2-hour lesson. And obviously this is unfortunately not counting the papers that have been thrown away that are living crumpled at the bottom of my backpack, the corners of notebooks, or the scribbled notes at the top of assignments. It's not counting anything in my Google Drive, Google Docs, or written in my notes in my phone. It's missing a lot of information, but it's clear just how much effort and thought goes into one single lesson. Our biggest fault in this project had been allowing for dead time, and so as soon as we realized what an issue that was and how distracting it was, we had to account for every second of classroom time to make sure that their attention was always on us. Every single day we would walk in with extra games planned just in case there was something that we needed to take care of, or extra questions or prompts to make sure that they can entertain themselves and each other while we're trying to get set up. And then something that unfortunately can't be included in the video because it's all digital is the pages and pages and pages of reflections and write-ups that followed each lab. But although that is the boring part, it was a very important step in refining these lessons and making things better for next time. The improvement that we had showed just between the first and second day that we had done this year was impressive because it genuinely takes so much self-reflection and evaluation, but it's very important and very rewarding. Most of it's still up in the air right now, so I won't get into specifics about the position, but I felt very proud of myself because at the end of my time working with Trillium, I had been offered a job there going into the summer and next year, so I was able to quit my food service job that I never enjoyed and focus on something that I really did. When people ask me questions about teaching and being in a classroom setting, I always tell them that it feels so rewarding. Not because it's not draining and not because it's not a lot of work and not because you don't feel, sometimes ripped off at the end of it, but because at the end of the day, you feel like you poured so much labor and love into something, but that labor and love isn't gone. You feel like you get to watch each individual student walk out of the room with a little piece of what you gave up that day. And I know it's cliche, but that's really what did it for me this whole time was the relationships with the students and getting to see them smile when they finally understand something, getting to hear about what they do when they get home or how their family is, and just establishing relationships and feeling like you can be a place of trust for somebody who might be vulnerable. By the third day that I had been working at Trillium, every day before I left, there would be a line of kids waiting to give me a hug. And that's something that I'm never going to forget, honestly.